Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. It's really great to be with everyone again. And I thank you for bringing me here to talk about what I feel is an important set uh, of issues. And I will be starting off on a somewhat sober point. So I just want you to be aware of that. Sometimes I would do things in my college classes. I would open it up and there'd be this really heavy video I would show them and they're like, hey, can you at least warn us? So I just wanted to mention that, I'm going to be just mentioning some serious things in our world as we talk about social justice and our connection to our spiritual lives and our human lives. And again, thank you. We live in a world where the most dangerous place for women on a global level is their own homes. A recent research called something by the numbers really mentioned that was one of their major findings across the globe, that the place where women are finding most violence against them is in their own homes. We live in a world where African and Black lives, unarmed people are cut down by the police, by state violence at alarming rates. Indigenous people also figure heavily into this violence, and generally these are unarmed people. African women experience much higher mortality rates in childbirth, even in modern industrial societies like the US America. People with disabilities are often made invisible and excluded from consideration. Indigenous women and girls are disappearing and being killed in horrendous numbers, exacerbated by what we call man camps. They're construction crews on oil pipelines, and these men often, unluckily, target these women and girls with physical and sexual violence. There are hard, real things going on in our world. Amidst amazing people doing serious work to fight and organize for social justice, for people's visibility and validation, for their safety, for their security, and for their sovereignty. The current coronavirus dynamics are deepening the nature of the oppressive situations I've mentioned. Just to name a few, domestic violence advocacy groups are registering spikes in calls for help due to abusers being isolated with their survivors. A report from France said calls are up actually 30% in that nation. African and Black people and other marginalized people are particularly endangered during this virus due to greater need to hold service jobs that have less or no sick pay. In addition to looming militarization in many cities, you may have heard that National Guard are being called in to certain cities, which I think we need to question. They may need to disseminate certain resources or something like that, but we have to be careful about how we see the military stepping into major cities, especially where Black and brown and Indigenous people are living. Oil companies are taking advantage of our virus lockdown and isolation to push through construction past Indigenous oversight and resistance. Some states are even creating legislation to criminalize protest against pipelines at this time. This is also something that's been going on even before the pandemic, but they're pushing even extra hard to slip through this legislation to criminalize protests against oil pipelines, which have shown to be very detrimental to Indigenous societies, but also clearly to the world in which we see these extractive industries creating high levels of pollution and environmental destruction. Our need to address social justice is socially required, politically required, and spiritually required on global and local levels. We have to be able to see the challenges in our communities, in our families, and in our organizations. We are called to listen, to feel, to hear, and authentically respond to voices of those who are harmed, those in oppressed and marginalized and erased populations. Our humanity is deepened by the validation of and advocacy for other humans. We are communal beings living in the community of society and the community of spirit. Our global, communal, and personal challenges in these areas come from systems of power and control, defined by concepts of racism, misogyny and patriarchy, anti-Semitism, heterosexism, transphobia, ableism, or classism. These oppressions are supported by ways of thinking, by behaviors, by systems and structures of power and control that show up in our national politics, judicial systems, medical practices, religious organizations, schools, and family groups. We are called to learn about, interrogate, and interrupt these oppressive, damaging, and hurtful systems, and the ideas that define many problematic relationships for us. There are ideas like male privilege, and many of these we've heard, and sometimes we hear them in the social media context, and we may not understand them fully, but there are things that we really need to look into. Ideas like male privilege, racism and white privilege, concepts like white saviorism, and things like mansplaining or manspreading. We must also look at ideas to support and learn about, like consent, like intersectionality, how multiple oppressions affect individuals and populations, ideas like advocacy, justice, love, and compassion in action. So much of oppression is about power and control. And like how redlining and workplace discrimination keep people of color from living wages and political and economic power. How men's control of economic and cultural power create violent, manipulative, and controlling environments for women. There's a powerful metaphor that I just want to mention in the moment that I read about in an article that kind of says, kind of explained really deeply kind of what women go through on a regular basis. And it was written by a man who was speaking to men in general, but to the larger context. He said, for women, we can often see men as walking around in our society as having a gun. We don't know if that gun is loaded or not. We don't know if it has bullets in it or not. But for many women, because of male privilege and power, women have to look at men as being weaponized. That at any point, any of us can do something that takes advantage of our male privilege and power that might be harmful to women. And that metaphor really stuck with me, that even though our gun isn't loaded, we're still carrying one. And how do they know? The only way they know is if we build the right relationships and are resonating a way that shows that we're in support of women and aware of the struggles that they go through every day, and possibly aware of our complicity in male privilege and power. So that was something that stuck very clearly with me. So many of us are born into white or male or heterosexual or ableist privilege and power. We are complicit with those larger systems that enact that power on community and societal levels. And that's kind of where that image of the gun and around male privilege came into play, that we were all complicit in that process. Privilege and power obscures our ability to hear voices of people harmed by these systems and by people's behaviors. And in some ways, we can see this in how survivors of sexual assault and harassment are not believed. They're dismissed offhand or attacked in legal and employment situations. It's often the case, we might often say, hey, why don't women just report to the police, or why don't you just say something? When many times, if not most of the times, that legal system itself is already attacking the woman when she's reporting harassment or an assault or something like that. And that can happen in employment situations also. Consider also that 50 to 60 survivors had to come forward against Harvey Weinstein to get even 2 or 3 into court after years of struggle. It's a serious, serious example of how male-controlled systems um, discriminate against women's voices and survivors' voices. It's often known, or many times not known, that rape test kits are backlogged and not even processed. There have been times where certain cities have been found to have 30,000 test kits that have not been processed. So there's no way even for the perpetrators to be found and to be adjudicated in the right way and to hold them accountable and to make their communities safer. So it's one way that the system does not even bring forward it's a path to justice for the survivors. Male perpetrators are often privileged, you know, and people say, well, he was nice to me. Well, I can't ever see him doing something like that. Well, he's so good with the kids, you know? So we end up marginalizing those voices of survivors in this situation. Likewise, with race, Europeans or whites who do not experience lives targeted by racism can often minimize, disbelieve, or add to racist harm that people of color often experience. And we know in the coronavirus situation that Asians are being targeted by really, really awful racism. Many times their businesses are being ignored. People are being spat at. I've heard situations of Asian people just being stabbed on the street because they're being blamed for this virus, which is not of their fault or creation. So even in a situation where we're hopefully creating a global consciousness for our global healing, racism is, and racist people and systems are targeting Asian people. POC are often, people of color are often experience far different experiences in organizations, communities, and societies at large than their white counterparts. And this is part of the white privilege concept that we have to understand. Sometimes we don't see that. We don't know that because those people are not living the same lives and having the same experiences of people of color. Privilege is made worse by fragility, defensiveness, and the insult to injury that comes from that. Someone who is harmed must be heard to find real and authentic healing. Consent is another important issue. When consent around our bodies, around touch is violated, when we're assaulted, harassed, or catcalled, there is often deep harm and many times a cumulative harm. Many women report when something happens, it's not the first time it's ever happened. It's the 10th time, it's the 100th time it's happened. So there can be a cumulative harm that happens even with something many of us and many men might think is very simple or very innocuous, but it's a cumulative harm. This harm, if we are loving and compassionate communities, has to be heard and healed on the terms of the person harmed. And often multiple oppressions exist intersectionally on the basis of sex or gender and sexual orientation, or race and class, or disability, race, and sex. When we don't acknowledge privilege and power, we are often not validating people's lived experiences, and/or we are not hearing the important stories of how they have been harmed. So how does this, discussion intersect or connect with Unity's principles? I mean, there are a lot of, things, any of the things that we've, that I've mentioned before could probably be broken out and talked about for, 30 minutes to an hour or more, all of these situations here, because there's so many nuances and things to understand about these. But I did want to bring some of this context of social justice back into the context of how we think as a unity community and what that might mean for us. So when I mentioned the principles, in a sense, it's going to be a paraphrase of the longer, more nuanced version you have on your own. But I wanted to mention those and some of the ways I see that social justice and bringing healing and validation back into our communities can be important in how they connect. So number one, God is good and everywhere present. This does not preclude the occurrence of harm and social imbalance. It is a necessity to engage social justice as an expression of that goodness, that God wants balance, healing, love, and compassion everywhere, in all places, at all times, and in all ways. Number 2, humans are divine and inherently good. So when we do step out of line, when we harm others, we are innately responsible and accountable to being part of that healing, dismantling oppressive systems and ideas and behavior so the innate goodness of humanity can be present, seen, and manifested. Thoughts have creative power. We can interrogate how power and privilege distort thought and action in ways that oppress and create harm. It is our duty to be aware of privilege and how we sustain and support it, to clarify thought toward deeper compassion, awareness, and justice. Number 4, prayer and meditation keep us aligned. We can pray and meditate on justice, on the healing of survivors and the oppressed, on the healing of perpetrators, and those whose privilege and power oftentimes goes unchecked. We must live the truth we know. Privilege and abusive power obscure and distort truth. For us to be our best, we must be willing to explore relationships of power, privilege, and oppression in our families, in our organizations, in our societies, and those larger constructs in our nations, and in ourselves, to lead a spiritually led life of compassion, clarity, and love. So what does this mean? What is the outcome of this? What are the ramifications, I guess, of what I've presented, or what these situations are? And much of this is just taking observations of our world and seeing what the nature of it is, and who we are and how we respond, and what are the things that keep us from our spiritual authenticity, our human authenticity, and the real manifestation of compassion and love in this world. So I think we are called to identify these oppressive power systems and deepen our learning toward healing on all levels. These are conversations that can often be difficult. They can be hard. They can be, fraught with anxiety, but they're ones that we need to have. Oftentimes, these hard conversations are the ones we need to have the most. They're the ones that bring the deepest healing, the deepest flow back to the balance that we are calling for, with spirit and with the people around us. We do need to interrogate our identities, who we are, what makes us who we are, and how collective identities, group identities, express or experience power or marginalization. And again, many times this marginalization and these privileges are exactly what shuts down the voices of the oppressed and disable us from hearing what is in the hearts of people who need us the most. If you will, sometimes people call it the least of these, but when we look into the hearts of people who have been harmed, sometimes we realize, wait a minute, you weren't the least. The community that did not serve you might have been the least of these. So, maybe there's ways for us to really liberate our mind around some of the concepts we are used to. We need to learn to listen, to heed and hear the voices of marginalized identities, people and groups, those that are harmed historically and presently, and those that experience harm in our midst. Our humanity and spiritual expansiveness is deepened by the validation of and advocacy for ourselves and for others. We are communal beings in unity in the community of our societies and the community of and with spirit. Thank you. I thank you for this time and to be able to present these ideas, and I hope they're thoughts that are provocative and evocative of other ideas that bring us to these deeper understandings and our deeper awarenesses around the people around us and how we see them, how they may see us, and how we may bring ourselves into alignment with spirit and with the spirits of people that mean the most to us. And of course, through this coronavirus challenge, I think many of us are having that expanded, where our actions that we engage in on any given day may affect people we can't even see. And that's an important awareness that informs us on lives leading towards social justice and love and compassion. Thank you.
Thank you. And we wanted to open up for questions. If anyone has questions for Ukumbwa about the world, about your own personal experiences.
So anyone who does raise the, oh, Jim, great. Let me unmute you. Okay, go ahead. Oh, the unmute didn't work. Oh.
He's on.
My question is, how have some of us looked at, I guess I'm just raise my hand to just start to explore in my own mind, how I am going to look at these things. I have in the past, gone to eliminating white racism workshops.
Right.
And in my men's workshops, we've looked at male domination and sexism. And so I guess I'm just saying that I actually am going to be going at 2 o'clock this afternoon into a Zoom class, into a Zoom co-counseling that I have with my two Catholic brothers. One's in Hartford and one's in Providence, and I'll be spending my 40 minutes on looking at venting my role in my male domination in my marriage and relationships, and I guess that's what I'm passing on.
Yeah, that's powerful, Jim. And I guess I just want to acknowledge, and maybe just reflect again what you said in this way. We find at this time that we are needing to be vigilant and consistent and persistent with fighting the coronavirus. We find also with the situations you said, Jim, around male domination, around white racism, that we also need to be persistent, consistent, and vigilant with how we look at those situations. And clearly you doing that changes your relationship in powerful ways. And I hope it is, in powerful ways with your partner, with your friends, with your loved ones, in ways that helps you see them better in a more expansive way. You see yourself in a more expansive way and in a more healthy way. And I just want to say thank you for that commitment to that time. And to that work. It's ultimately important for us to be involved in this work, in our awareness and building skills in this area on a constant level. There's no time that's not good for that, just like there's no time that's not good to consider, hey, did I take my vitamin C to keep my immune system strong? Are we taking I see hands being sanitized, right? So we need to be consistent and persistent and vigilant in all of this. So thank you for talking to being a model about that. And that's what that is, Jim. Thank you.
Raleigh, Maya,
Maya? Yes, she's unmuted.
Consistent, persistent, and vigilant. I love that. And thank you so much for stepping up to address these questions so directly. Ukumbwa, I really, I admire you for bringing this to us so clearly. And I feel that we're a unique group of people to take up this conversation. I know we have had a few over the years, and they've been really good. And we're in a unique space in this community to look at these things from the perspective of spirit and to listen more deeply about them. So thank you for starting the conversation. I would move for continuing topics. You know, like you said, there's about 6 of them in there.
Yeah.
So, you know, even to suggest to the community like once a month, hey, Ukumbwa is wonderful. Please,
He will be back. He will be back.
That's
thank
very
you
kind.
all.
Yeah, and thank you, Maim, for saying that, and for acknowledging that I didn't start the conversation. I mean, I know you just said that, but you also said that you've had these conversations, and that's important. And yes, I do think it's important for us to continue them and deepen them, and add to them, and continue to go deeper for each other's sake and each other's sake. So thank you for that, Mike.
Alicia has her hand up.
You have a question? Thank you. And what words would you share with somebody who really, let me rephrase this. Okay, so as spiritual people, I know not just this community, but other spiritual folks in my life, friends, forgiveness is a topic that's discussed so often. And in examples of oppression and dominance throughout the world, folks who are oppressed are expected to just forget and forgive and just let it go. You know, can you talk a little bit about how narratives like that can actually be damaging to the healing process and can further oppression as well? Both, like, I understand in the macro, but more for folks who feel that in their own life, you know, like, geez, why can't I let this go? Like, I should just forgive this person. Or if folks are being told, like, but we're spiritual, just forgive. Remember, we're spiritual. Like those words can often get conflated. What would you say to someone having that kind of dialogue going on?
Right. It's a great question and an important concept to look into. One of the things I would say, first and foremost, that healing has no time limit. When someone is harmed, and this can mean on the personal level or on the national level, and I want to mention 2 situations in Canada and South Africa very quickly as I continue. But the concept of forgiveness means different things to different people, different cultural contexts, just different human ways of thinking about it. We cannot force forgiveness on someone. Someone has to be ready to give that gift of forgiveness. That forgiveness is often said to not even be for the perpetrator, it's for the survivor. You know, it's for the one who's been harmed that our forgiveness opens up our heart again. But we may not be ready for that. That's a vulnerable place. We may not be ready yet to open up our heart when we're still seeing the nature of harm around us, when we're still feeling direct harm coming toward us, direct oppression and direct abusive power in our lives. That may not even be a concept we can hold on to, and it may not be safe or right for us to go there yet. Yeah. We may have other things we need to do. And so that's on a personal level. On another level, in Canada had a truth and reconciliation process, as did South Africa. Now, in that process, many perpetrators of state violence, awful situations of torture and killing and rape and murder, were brought out by the state, by police, by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, things like that, by state and local organizations and agents of those nations, and also the people who have been oppressed, the indigenous people, the African people, Azanian people, have given of their heart and of their soul to talk about the harm that has come to them. What didn't happen in both of those situations is neither the Canadian state nor the South African state neither of them changed the nature of the oppression that already existed for the indigenous people. They didn't change their behavior. You know, they talked about it. Yes, they wrote apartheid off of the book, but apartheid structures still exist in South Africa, and the people are still struggling against it. So what is the place of forgiveness in a situation when the person or structure or system that's harming you is still harming you?
Mm.
There may be a place for that, but we cannot require it of anybody. That's something people have to come to on their own for their own benefit. And it's not something we could say, well, it's been a year, you should forgive and forget. That, you know,
Mm.
there's reasons why when someone gets, like if they're the victim or survivor of childhood abuse, sexual abuse, it could be when they were 2. The effects of it come out when they're 45 many times.
Mm.
How is it, you know, there's no time limit. They may take the next 20 years to try to figure that out and come back to center on it all, or a place where they can carry that in a way that feels strong and powerful for them. So there's no way we can ask someone who's harmed and a population who's harmed, a nation of people who have been harmed by another power, to throw them into the, you know, kind of what is the force and influence of forgiveness that oftentimes comes from people who just don't want to hear their story anymore. Yeah. So we can't require that of people.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Mayim has a hand up again.
Oh,
Well,
and I think
I hear you that, you know, we can't ask people to forgive and forget. But I also heard what you said about the timelessness of forgiveness, you know, that no matter how many years it is, when forgiveness happens, when the healing happens, it happens in that holy instant you share with someone, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and very quickly, you know, I grew up with a very challenging relationship with my father. And there was much more emotional abuse that came from his direction than physical abuse or anything like that. But I actually remember the exact moment I was walking down this sidewalk at college, where I knew I could let go of my hatred for who he was in my life. And it was partially because I was outside of that context. I was now relatively safe from it. And I know that my relationship with him changed when that happened, because I could accept him on another level, but I had to be out of the context of his direct influence. So yes, I completely get, and I think there was a forgiveness that was there. You know, I didn't forget. I didn't realize, you know, every time I went home, I wasn't like, hey, Dad, everything's gonna be fine now. You know, but yes, there was a heart opening that happened, and I remember it photographically. I can see the trees. It was a sunny day in upstate New York.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I get that.
Mm.
Yeah.
So you could say those are like the miracles that we're looking for, really. That kind of healing, that's a miracle when you get it. So I want to finish my thought that
Yes,
it's
please.
not that you know, we say, oh, why can't I, or why can't you just forgive and forget this? We can't do that. But what we're here to do is ask people to make that shift out of keep repeating that and being stuck in that. The harm is still there. That story is still there of, you know, I was damaged by this and this happened, but step out of it. I feel that that's our mission, that we stay in a centered place where we can look at that in a different way and just allow a shift to happen in perception in ourselves. I'm not saying what that is, but I just know that can happen, that I'm trying to use that more and more. Just don't get caught in the story. Just say, I'm going to stand here in this circle where I don't understand it. I don't understand what's happening here, but I'm going to trust the process, no matter what it is.
That's great and totally powerful and important. And I would say the other part of that, the corollary to that, is that we have to shift and change and leave the processes and behaviors of oppression also, of harm, that cause that person to be in that place in the first place. We have to bring accountability to that privilege and power, to those people, to those structures and systems, to stop that harm so that flowering can happen unabated. Think about that. That's like a party I want to see happen all over the world. where the systems and structures of oppression stop and cease and desist, because people did the hard work and said, oh my goodness, this is how I'm sustaining that. Oh my goodness. Like, Jim was saying very, very bravely, this is how I might be bringing this into my marriage. This is real, So I just want us to also hold that, how do we bring that cessation to step out of those stories as oppressive elements in our own communities, in our own work.
So Lorraine has her hand up.
And Shira does too.
Go ahead, Lorraine.
And then Shira next, please.
Yep.
Yeah.
Lorraine?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't have a question. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Shira, you're on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for what you shared. I think it was very brave and very powerful. And I guess my question is, as someone who has spent much of my adult life recovering from sexual abuse and sexism and within.
She's muted.
You muted yourself by mistake.
Muted. Raleigh, she's muted.
I didn't mute her. I don't know how she got muted.
Okay, just a mistake.
Oh, there she is.
Mike, can you hear me? Yeah, somebody called in, so I had to decline the call.
Okay.
Sorry about that. My question is, how do I can also see myself? I feel like some of the ways that I tried to stand up for myself were not so helpful because I had so much anger and rage about what happened to me. And my question is, what ways have you found to heal from it? And also, I was interested in what you said about white saviorism, because I think I have fallen into that, especially recently. And maybe because I was so looking for someone to save me from what was happening. And it's easy to fall into patterns like that. And also, how have you been able to look at both the oppression that you faced, or ways that you might have been sexist in the same way that I would look at ways that I might be racist or have other oppressive behaviors, in a way that doesn't mire you in guilt and shame, because that's something that I'm dealing with all the time. And I hear you a lot about, you can't, if you want someone to forgive you, you have to be willing to change the way you act. And at the same time, I can see that the difficulty that I've had with forgiveness, and I've come to a lot of it, it wasn't so helpful, some of it, for myself either, or the people around me. So I'm just wondering how you kind of bring all of that together. And I guess the last thing is, how much of this is connected to a system of economic injustice in which all of this is happening, so that while particular groups are being targeted, it's almost like oppression is in some ways the air we breathe, and at the same time you want to stay in touch with that higher dimension of spirituality. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, I want to touch on that last part first. The economic oppression can exacerbate everything, can make it a ton worse. Because in that context, the marginalized identities are always pushed down. The ones that have more power are always fighting for more power. They're wrangling for that right now, even in this 2.2, how many trillions of dollars did they just agree, or billions of dollars? now that came from Congress or something like that. Yes, 2 billion is it, or
Billion.
okay, it's more zeros than my than my checking account has seen yet. But
Yeah.
right. But even in that, they're noticing, oh, we're bailing out banks and and companies like cruise ships, which, what's a cruise ship to the larger, culture of society? And we're not actually giving enough money or bailout even to students. Students didn't even come out at all in this package. I just saw a report about that. But a lot of times even families where someone is paying child support may not get any support at all because of the child support dynamic. But what does that mean for the family, for the children, for generally the women who are involved in that? So this economic part can really exacerbate so much of the rest of it and defines the culture of how we see each other and how we value each other. The system wants to put a dollar sign on all our lives, and that's not who we are. That's not who we are. So it can often deepen these things. Just to go back to the first thing you said was about how do we heal from inside. I mean, I think, and please correct me and guide me if I'm not hitting your question in the right way. But part of what I got from your question was that we all need to define our healing in the way that we have to do it. It's always on our basis. I would again put the onus of your anger on your perpetrator. It is not your responsibility to edit your anger about what happened to you. And it's actually the responsibility of your community to be able to hold your anger and to hold your emotions and to hold your process with you. The only place that can hold that is community and spirit, Because even the community, we're like, oh my goodness, how do we do this? So we hand it to spirit. We hand it to our ancestors. We hand it to God. We hand it to all our resources. We hand it to Mother Earth to say, oh my goodness, I can't handle this. We can't handle this on our own. That was amazing, but it helps us to understand it when you're able to express the authenticity of your experience, no matter how loud that is, no matter how raucous it is. And to some degree, we don't want anyone to be physically dangerous to themselves or other people. But it's important for us to understand that that's what you're thinking about. We can't hide the nature of what oppression causes inside of us. And oftentimes privilege and power wants to shut that down, wants to police our tone, right? I often hear, men saying, oh, I don't like the way women are saying that. You're too loud, you're too shrill, you're too this, you're too that. Can you tone that down a bit? Then I'll listen to what you have to say. It's like, really? We don't get to say that, So I think it's important. And again, what I got from what you were saying there, Shira, is that we have to heal on our own basis, but we have to be held with love and compassion by those around us to allow us to express the depth of our hurt. And that's how we heal. And around not getting caught up in shame, that's just a muscle we have to flex. We have to be able to look into the mirror of our imperfection and go, yep, that's me today. I was better yesterday, or I'm going to be better tomorrow. But this is who I am. This is what I've been complicit in. And I have to hold it, and I have to say, well, there are these 1, 2, 3, 9, 3,000 things that I can keep working on to keep my focus toward social justice, toward being a better human being, and not falling into the place of defensiveness and fragility and getting so caught up in, oh my goodness, I'm a bad person. I'm a guy who man spreads on the train. I take up too much space. I'm too loud in vocal spaces. Well, we practice being quiet. We practice being actually smaller. We can take up less space, but we have to, it's part of our practice of humanity that we have to keep moving forward in the interest of those around us. It's for us. Yeah, totally. But it's for the interest of other people. We keep moving forward. We just keep marching. We just keep loving. We keep loving ourselves and other people deeply. So, but we have to hold that. We have to know that it's possible. And I always say, look for that blade of grass coming up through the concrete. It's one of the things that has been so inspirational for me all the time. So I can be anywhere. I can be in the middle of Copley Square and I look down at the ground and say, well, there's that blade of grass coming through. There's that weed coming through. And that's us. We can do that. We do it all the time. And sometimes we're like, oh my goodness, this concrete is too heavy. And it is, but we find a way. We always find a way. We can do this, you know? And in that sense, you know, for me, nature is very powerful. You know, it's like I do cuttings of plants. Sometimes I cut off the roots of this long stalk and I cut off the leaves and I put it in water. And I'm like, what? It's growing leaves and roots? How does that happen? It was like a stump. And there's still life within it.
Shall we move to the heart and soul song, Alicia?
Sure. Are there any last questions?
We have another one from Jim.
Jim.
And thank you for being aware of time.
Jim, you're on.
I'm muting. Okay, just quickly. Just a quick answer on how to look at this spiritually. First of all, I want you to know that in the organization that I'm in, that all us white people have considered we all call ourselves racist, even though it's a very punitive thing to, you know, to say, oh my gosh, well, you're good. Okay.
I get it.
Because, you know, for me, it's like, wait a second. If I'm seeing two people being beaten up next to me, I'm going to be affected by that. So me, as a 67-year-old person watching, you know, what's happening with people being hosed down and things like that. And also for me to admit right now that, you know, sometimes I have to look at my nervousness or my sense of being apologetic, you know, or like, okay, well, let's single this person out because they actually had it harder than me. So let me give this person my own space. The second part of this question, though, is do I see the friends that I have relationships with, you know, a person just regularly talking about, well, she didn't have to choose to sleep with him to become an actress. You know, she had that choice. Or, you know, another person, you know, so I guess where I'm at is, you know, so for me, sometimes to speak up against, you know, speak out even a little bit, like with, you know, giving a contrary view on this, in knowing my own personality is like, oh my God, if somebody gets mad at me, oh my God, I don't know where, you know, oh my God. But, you know, that fine line is like, well, come on now, you know, and then I guess hopefully that second part is explained well enough. Thank you.
Yeah, and what I got from that second part is that, you know, there's a desire to address problematic thought and problematic behavior, you know, and yes, it is often met with anger, with, you know, some kind of backlash and things like that. And that's where, you know, again, we come to our own resilience. We come to know that sometimes the battle we want to win or fight is not going to be won right now. We put in our 2 cents, we put in our positive input, and we know we have to back away at that point. It may not be safe for you to stay in that conversation, and they may not be ready to listen. But, you know, it's really important that we say it, and then we might have to go, and that's okay, you know, because we're going to fight the battle at another time. We're going to love, and in a sense, love that person another time, because that's what you're doing when you're challenging their problematic, imbalanced thought. You know, so thank you for that. And if there was a piece at the beginning that you still wanted me to hit, that would be good too. But I also want to be aware of time. Yeah. Thank you, Jim.
Mayim?
I think Laura has a question.
Oh, Laura?
She hasn't.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Mhm.
Where's Laura? She's
I
she's not mute.
unmuted you, but it's not working.
You're still mute. She's still muted.
There, I unmuted myself.
Okay.
I just, two things. One, thank you from the bottom of my heart for your extremely thoughtful, clear, comprehensive, loving, deeply intelligent, gorgeous presentation today. It's absolutely stunning. I really loved it. Every word. Thank you so, so, so much. I also wanted to speak to shame very briefly from a spiritual perspective. It has come to me very clearly that the systems of oppression come from always a place of feeling afraid that we're not valuable. So thinking that if I'm not valuable, then I have to make myself more valuable than somebody else, that I get value by putting somebody else down. Of course, that never works.
No.
And so the shame comes from playing both roles. You know, you receive shame if you're oppressed upon, but you also feel shame by being in the oppressive role. They both feel really bad, and they come from thinking that we're not valuable and we're not the child of God. So what really has helped me is to feel deeply in my heart that I am loved, I am the beloved of God, I am valued, cherished, and known through and through, and everyone is likely the beloved of God, valued, cherished, and known through and through, and we're made of the same essence. And then the desire to think I need to be better than you just kind of goes away.
Right. And that's so powerful. Thank you. And thank you for your kind words. They're very moving. I think that's the goal where everyone sees their divinity, where everyone sees their value and knows that their value is intrinsically tied to the validation of the value of all, right? So that no one is obscured, no one is truncated, no one is, as I've learned to say, edited. No one's life is edited by other people. We are all living our full humanity, our full experience. And I mean this from humans to worms, to trees, to oceans, to whales. That everyone is validated to the mosquito. I know we don't like mosquitoes, but that we value, if all the mosquitoes disappear. Okay, anyway, that we're all valued for who we are in parity and equality and egalitarianism. That's our goal. Yeah.
Mayim has her hand up, and I think after Mayim, we could probably move on.
I just want to wrap it up with another word of thanks, and thanks for our community that we can do this together. I loved what you said about experiencing our full humanity. I mean, we are here to examine the shadows and then bring them into the light. That's where we stand, inviting others to make that shift too. And what a blessed community that we can do this together, each one of you, one by one. I treasure you, and each one of us brings so much that makes this a group that's much bigger than we look. We know how powerful we are. So thank you all for doing this work. Thank you, Ukumbwa, for bringing this today.
Thank you all, and thank you for that final word. I will add nothing to that.